Rocky Top Insider presents the RTI Rim Runner with Bob Baskerville and Ryan Shumpert.
Welcome. Time for another edition of the RTI Rim Runner. I'm Bob Baskerville, joined as always by Ryan Shumpert, who's out there covering the beat on all things vol athletics, but certainly does a great job covering basketball, and we love talking college hoops. Today, we're going to kind of widen that lens beyond just Tennessee, because there has been a lot that went on during what we call Feast Week surrounding the Thanksgiving holiday. But first, before we get started, let me just mention to you that if you're checking us out on video, you're watching us on the Rocky Top Insider channel on YouTube, make sure you like and subscribe. We love the support, really appreciate the feedback we're getting on the show so far. Or you might be listening to us as a podcast, and it's all good that way too. We're available wherever you listen to your podcasts. Make sure you download us there as well. Again, big show today, but first let's say hello to my guy, Ryan Shumpert. Ryan, how was your holiday? How you doing?
It was good. No, glad to be back on here, and had good travels to Vegas and back. So, and a good Thanksgiving. So no complaints from me.
Well, before we dig in, one of the things I was going to say is I have to give Ryan some props, because we were talking about, I think it was it was definitely before the last show we did. We were talking about all the freshmen, what a great freshman class we're seeing across college basketball. And we talked about all the usual suspects. And this was a name I had certainly heard, but I hadn't paid much attention to. And Ryan said, you got to keep an eye on this kid from Houston, Kingston Flemings, because he is special. And all of a sudden, at the Players era, Kingston Flemings arrived, man. Now everybody's talking about the guy. So, again, Shump knows ball.
Yeah, Tennessee got to see it firsthand. So I'm sure the majority of our listeners and viewers are Tennessee fans. So it was definitely the performance for them to see from Kingston Flemings to make them believe the hype that I'd given him. Because yeah, he was pretty incredible in that game, and he forced it. He made it really, really important that Tennessee shot their free throws so well down the stretch.
Yeah,
he made just a lot of tough shots in the last 90 seconds of that game to keep Houston from going away.
Absolutely. Well, we got a great show on tap today. We'll recap what was, again, an absolutely off-the-hook feast week. We'll offer our takeaways on what impressed us the most. And then we're also going to get some perspective from one of our favorite national writers when Kevin Sweeney from SI Now and Basket Under Review joins us. And we'll wrap the show up a little later talking about a very important week ahead for the Vols as they gravitate closer to a top 10 ranking in the national polls. But first, our opening tip is college basketball moving into overdrive during Feast Week, as we were introduced to really the personification of pay for play or play for pay basketball with the inaugural Players Era Festival. 18 teams featuring some of the best squads in the country converged on Las Vegas. A $1 million prize went to the champion for NIL purposes, and then some other awards and cash prizes or NIL prizes for teams that finished second, third, and fourth. Now, Shump, the gameplay cast some serious March-like vibes for me. I mean, I was blown away with some of these games, although it wasn't perfect. The criteria for advancement, and we were texting about it all week long, was, in a word, kind of odd.
It was, yeah, with the point differential, and I think more than anything, it's just difficult to gauge that off of two games when it's not like round robin. Not everybody's playing the same type of teams, so
yeah,
it's difficult. Obviously you have 18 teams, that limits what you can do. It sounds like they're going to 32 for next year. So yeah, look, I think some changes need to be made from. Not that I paid a ton of attention to it last year, outside of just a couple of the games that were pretty good. I know Alabama was out there, and I think played Houston in a good game. So I watched some of the games, but wasn't really following the event that closely. And it sounds like they had made some changes from year one to year two that people liked. So we'll have to see what that looks like. I mean, it seems in flux. To me, it's as simple as like you got to have 8 teams, 16 teams, 24 teams, or 32 teams, and play separate 8, brackets of 8 teams. To me, that's the simple first fix. And to me, I would just divide whatever prize money you have into those pools. Now, they have talked about it. That I'm blanking on the guy's name that runs the event, trying to bring people back, a week or two later to winners for another game. I don't see how that possibly works. Teams are going to want to with games. Not every coach is the same. I personally cannot imagine Rick Barnes is going to want to take, even if Tennessee were to win one of those, want to take another trip back to Vegas 2 weeks later to play in one more game or 2 more games. So some flawed stuff for sure, but the basketball was certainly good once they actually got out on the floor.
Yeah, I mean, last thing I'll say about the format was, you take a school like Iowa State that won all 3 of their games and, looked by all measures, looked good. But they didn't make it to that Final Four. Meanwhile, Kansas did. And of course, Kansas, they won all 3 of their games too, but their matchups were certainly different than Iowa State's, for example. So I don't know. I just think that's the part I agree with you. I just think they need to work on pursuing it as more of a bracket-based tournament, because the concept in and of itself is great because the basketball was good. My last question to you on this, Ryan, because you were there, sometimes it felt like I was seeing some empty seats though. What were the crowds like for these games?
Yeah, definitely empty seats. I mean, at no point really was it truly full. And obviously, I was only in one. Tennessee played all their games in one of the 2 arenas, and I never made it over to the other gym. But some of the games when it was bigger fan bases, like Syracuse, Kansas, when they played, there were good crowds for that game. Never completely full. And then some other games, it was pretty empty. I mean, Tennessee Rutgers was very, very empty. As obviously the first game of the day. Tennessee had, a decent showing of fans, but certainly not one of the biggest ones in the event. And Rutgers had nobody there. So, yeah, obviously that was a big discourse. I don't know how much to compare it to. I'd never been to a Maui or a Battle for Atlantis or anything like that. So I didn't have a comparison sake from being there and what the crowd noise was like. At times in some of the better games with bigger crowds, I thought the atmosphere was fine. It didn't feel bad, but certainly there were a lot of empty seats. And for some of the lesser matchups and some of the blowouts, or just some of the teams that didn't have as a fan bases that traveled as much, it was definitely a little bit more of a bizarre, quiet feel to it.
Yeah, I watched so much ball last week, probably with the threat of my family disowning me around the holidays. But and the reason I bring that up is as good as the Players era was, there was a lot of concern of what's it going to mean for Maui? What's it going to mean for Battle of Atlantis? Those types of tournaments that we've always loved in the past. There was still high-profile matchups last week around the country. I mean, in Maui, it turned out to be, I thought, one of the better stories was USC. They all of a sudden, I think they're in the AP poll now. I think they broke into the rankings this past week, but USC looked really, really good. Now, it was not a field quite as tough as what we saw in Vegas, but they took Arizona down for the title, Arizona State, I should say, down for the title in that one. And I don't know, all those pieces and parts that Musselman's got there, Chad Baker-Mazara, who annoys me, but 27-year-olds can still play ball, and Rodney Rice and others. I mean, USC looks actually pretty good. And at Atlantis, Vanderbilt, man, Vanderbilt's good again. They were pretty good last season, tournament team under Mark Byington. They win that title, and I mean, they beat the crap out of St. Mary's for that title.
Yeah, on the USC front, they looked good. I think my expectations were low. They'd kind of pulled out that miracle game against Troy in 3 overtimes. It had just a crazy
True.
finish.
That's true.
I think right before they went out there. But no, I mean they look good. I don't know how great any of those teams are. I mean, Boise State's the highest on KenPom at 58. I thought Seton Hall was one of my bigger takeaways from the week. Even though they lost that game close to USC, I thought they looked good. They upset North Carolina State, had arguably maybe the best win out there. So USC looked good. They I think are that top end of the Big Ten is so good, and they're certainly not in that class. But through a month of the season, they look like a surefire NCAA tournament team, and a team that could probably find itself somewhere between a 4 and a 7, 8 seed. So, and then I'll jump the gun a little bit. We're going to hit on some of our biggest takeaways
Yeah.
from the week, and since you brought up Vanderbilt, I mean that's one of them for me. I'm just about all in on Vanderbilt. I've probably been higher than some, just kind of following the metrics, and liking. There was no real star power on the team, but liking the pieces that Mark Byington put together. But I mean, they've just been stellar, and that they played well in Atlantis. I mean, Duke Miles has been incredible.
Yeah.
I can't say I really expected that one. Tyler Tanner, what he's done to me hasn't been as surprising. He was good as a backup point guard last year, and he's done a really good job of taking care of the basketball, shooting it really well from 3-point range, and that's just an offense that's really, really potent. And we'll see. They don't play like, look at their schedule right now. They've played UCF on the road. They've played VCU. They've played St. Mary's. They got SMU tomorrow in the challenge. They got Memphis and Wake Forest. They have some solid games in non-conference. It's not like it's a weak non-conference schedule, but no one truly elite. So, second SEC game, they host Alabama on January 7th. I feel like that's the first real big test. So I don't know just how high I'm, truly am on them, but I'm all in on this Vanderbilt team being a top 4 team in the SEC, and a team that's gonna be a 3, 4 or better seed in the NCAA tournament.
Our guest Blake Lovell from a couple weeks ago from Southeastern 16, he brought them up, and I was kind of like, say what? Because they lost so many players, and Duke Miles, who Tennessee made a little bit of token pursuit after, I was like, okay, he can't be the guy, but man, he looks like a guy right now. They're playing really well. So
and a couple things I'll say on Vanderbilt. I mean, it's the offense. It's been incredible. They're fourth on KenPom. If you take out the baked-in metrics from before the season on Bart Torvik, they're number 1 on offense. And you look at it, you have Duke Miles, who's shooting 47% from 3, Tyler Tanner shooting 52% from 3, and
wow.
Tyler Nichols shooting 46% from 3. All 3 have made 17 or more threes. Look, some of those numbers are going to go down, I'm sure, with Tanner and Miles especially. Those numbers are kind of insane. In Miles, we have a little bit more of a sample size, but those 3 guys are really, really good shooters. And Tyler Nickel, I could easily see in the 40 to 45% range for a season. So they're able to space the floor and share the ball really well, and just a well-polished team without what feels like a true star. Though maybe Duke Miles will kind of continue to prove me wrong and become that all-SEC type guy.
Yeah. Quickly, Fort Myers, they had a little invitational, and the noteworthy game there, Michigan State, looks legit. They look the part right now. They took down North Carolina. It's weird seeing Michigan State being able to hit shots, but so far they are. I don't know if that's sustainable, but Izzo's got those guys dialed up the right way. And then the last thing I'll mention before we kind of ruminate on all this is big-time holiday one-off games. One in Chicago with Arkansas and Duke on Thanksgiving night, and we'll talk about some of these SEC teams a little later, because Arkansas showed me a lot, but Duke is like, good Lord, Cameron Boozer is just a stud. And then the last thing I'll say, and get your thoughts, is the next day they had a noontime game at the Garden with Illinois and UConn, and well, I felt like UConn was dialed in too, because Illinois is obviously a good team. Vols are going to be facing them here later this week, but UConn seems like they're clicking right now. And Braylon Mullins is back, so they're back to full strength. I think Terrace Reed was back for some of that game too.
I was joking with somebody that, I don't know, maybe Illinois ate their Thanksgiving meal on Thursday. Dan Hurley, he was on top of it. He said Wednesday Thanksgiving meal, so we're not sleepy for the game on Friday. But no, they came out sharp, and it feels. Obviously they won the national championship in 23 and 24, but it feels like they're closer to where they were those years than where they were a season ago.
Yeah. So let's, we've been kind of sharing some thoughts, but I wanted to give both of us maybe our, let's say 2, maybe 3 if we have time, biggest takeaways from Feast Week in terms of, again, this is widening the lens. We're going to get some time on Tennessee a little later in the show, but I bet you and I probably have one of our biggest takeaways probably matches the other.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure I know what it is. I'll let you take it if you want to go first.
All right. Michigan. We all knew Michigan was going to be good. They worked the transfer portal really well. Bunch of big dudes too. I mean, Morris Johnson. We talked about Ade Mara coming over from UCLA and how he's already been impactful. And then Yaxel Lendeborg. This team, what they did in Las Vegas, I think I'd be hard pressed to remember a team winning 3 consecutive games. And by the way, the last 2 were against ranked teams where they won by 40, 30, and 40. And we know Dusty May runs great offense. I enjoyed watching them last year when they ran those 2 bigs on the pick and roll, Danny Wolf and Vlad Golden. This is a different kind of team, but man, they look lethal right now.
It's a different type of team, but in some ways it's also kind of similar. To me, they have a little bit of a Florida feel and heck, you could say Tennessee feel a little bit too with Nate Ament playing out on the wing, and they play kind of 3 bigs with Mara, who I remember, I think I talked about this last week, how impressed I was watching him in the tournament last year before he kind of ran out of gas. But Morris Johnson is a 6'9" guy playing on the wing, and then like you said, Yaxel Lindenberg from UAB being the other guy in there. So I was curious early in the season how the spacing worked. I mean, that's obviously been a question we've had with Tennessee. It's been a question with Florida, and it looked a little shoddy at times, I guess, early in the season. They won a very low scoring game against TCU, and I was kind of uncertain of whether it was clicking. But man, to do it against 94 against San Diego State, 102 against Auburn, 101 against Gonzaga, and San Diego State and Auburn are typically kind of known for defense. The metrics aren't as high on them as that end of the court this year, but they're high on Gonzaga, and Gonzaga has a really good front line that you would think if anyone could slow down Michigan's front line, it'd be them. I mean, heck, I was wondering if Gonzaga was a wagon who, might have a chance to run the table in the regular season going into that game, and Michigan just put a whipping on them. So incredibly impressive from them.
Yeah. You mentioned, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but one of my other, I have many takeaways, but I isolated it to a couple. Michigan's one, but my other one was, I think I was ready to dance on the grave of Stephen Pearl in Auburn, based on what we saw in their opener with Bethune-Cookman, and but then they played Houston close, and I thought, I'll tell you, the one thing that got me over the hump and is like, okay, I guess Auburn's more for real than I want to give them credit, is how they beat St. John's, and how they, you go up against Rick Pitino and that team, and they bring everything. They throw the kitchen sink at you. And I figured a young coach like Stephen Pearl, that's going to be a struggle. They end up winning the game by double digits. They won by, I think, 10 or 11. Yeah. All of a sudden, I'm not saying Auburn, mark them down for another Final Four, but I think the beat goes on, and it feels so far, maybe Dad's whispering in his ear, but it feels like Stephen Pearl is kind of charting his own course, kind of creating his own narrative. He's not as, bombastic as Bruce was and all those things. They showed me something in Vegas.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of on the border with Auburn. I don't totally know what to make of them at this point. Again, it is, to your point, it's a much different looking team than they have looked, and I'm not sure Stephen being the coach has a ton to do with that, given the roster they already put together and stuff like that. But it's a more offensive heavy team. They're not playing as many guys. Like, they're not. That's obviously always been a staple of Bruce's teams going back to Tennessee, is playing 9-10 deep. To me, it feels like right now it's not been that dramatic. So. We'll see. I think we get a bigger and a better look at Auburn. To me, some interesting matchups. I think it's NC State in the Challenge this weekend, and they head to Arizona this weekend. So we'll continue to learn more, but I don't really know exactly what to make of them at this point.
Yeah, some real likable personalities in that Stephen Pearl versus Will Wade matchup. That should be. I got nothing against Stephen's fine,
Well, I was saying this with somebody. Stephen's got some work to do. Like, Auburn typically has, from a player standpoint, some guys that you find really annoying, and this team, from the player standpoint, I think is very, very likable. So Stephen's got more of what we saw against Houston. Charging onto the court to argue with the refs after the game's over. You need more of that to give Auburn an annoying vibe because the players aren't going to do it this year, I don't think.
No, apparently not. Yeah, the Chad Baker Mazzara defection has really left them lacking in terms of that kind of swag that they used to have. But it's a good team. It's a good team. Better than I was expecting from them, I guess, based on the way the season started down on the Plains. Well, this moves into our big thing for today. We're going to continue kind of this conversation about what's going on across the board in college basketball, because like I said, last week was a bit of a blowtorch. There was so much great action going on, and we're seeing so many things. And we got a guest, Ryan. I'll let you do the intro to talk about it.
Yeah, I would appreciate Kevin Sweeney of Sports Illustrated and Basket Under Review. Does a phenomenal job of covering college basketball. He was out in Las Vegas last week, and then just a little holiday for Kevin. He was at the United Center on Thursday night for Arkansas Duke. So Kevin, man, appreciate you taking some time to join us.
Yeah, sorry, we muted there. Yeah, I've had about a 3-hour Thanksgiving. I went from the airport straight to my girlfriend's family's house. I had a meal, had a couple of cocktails, and then straight to Duke, Arkansas, which is a heck of a game.
Yeah, that's how you get your fix in. That's how you get your true feast week fix in.
Yeah, Kevin. And by the way, thank you for joining us. You and I have talked on the radio before, so this is a treat to get to chop it up with you on just this college basketball. We were just, I was saying earlier, I feel like maybe my family is about ready to disown me last week, because we were all in the same house, but I was glued to the television watching all these games, man. It was, I think for all the people who were worried, I don't want to say it's not a problem at all, but the whole notion that Atlantis and Maui are just non-starters, I think they've got some work to do, but I think there was great basketball there. I mean, obviously Players era, though, led the way.
Yeah, look, it's going to be different. It's a different environment and a different landscape that we've been in. I do think people will still come to really enjoy Maui and Atlantis if they stay in these current forms. Like Atlanta's had an awesome field, like some of the best Cinderella potential teams, and then the Vandy team that's been phenomenal to start the year that looks like maybe an SEC title contender. Actually, I think the favorite to win the SEC on KenPom right now, which I don't think a lot of people saw coming. So, those were great. And then Players era, I think they have work to do from like an environment standpoint. I think it feels a little sterile in those gyms, even though I think the crowds were actually relatively good. That was a common critique. It's really hard to build massive crowds at these Thanksgiving week events. That's why most of them are played in tiny ballrooms and high school gyms and whatnot. So when you play it in an NBA arena, it's going to look a certain type of way. I think they have work to do on the atmosphere front, work to do on the format front, especially as they go up to 32 teams. But in terms of the quality of basketball, it was as good as it gets, and certainly made for a fun feast week for me, and I hope for a lot of people.
Keeping in Players era and kind of the bell of the ball what Michigan did. I know you wrote about this, but it kind of felt, I hadn't played a ton of huge games, but TCU and Wake Forest a little spotty offensively, and then just to come in and steamroll the way they did in Vegas. Well, what do you feel like clicked for Michigan last week?
Yeah, I think part of it was just, having more time with all these guys playing together. It's such a different, style that they want to play. And I think they had some injuries in October that limited them in practice. Limited the reps they could get together. And so there was very much like a learn on the fly situation in early November, and it all came together in Vegas. I do think you saw them maybe play a little bit less through Elliot Cadeau and let the ball maybe flow through Lendeborg, who's a phenomenal player, a potential lottery pick, and a guy I think will go very high in the draft, be an All-American. Cadeau's really talented, but there's bumps when you're playing this like small non-shooter on the ball with all these bigs. And I think they felt like if they could put more shooting on the floor to surround the size, it's going to be pretty compelling. And I also think their defense just took another step and went from really good to elite. And when you defend it the way that they are, you're going to get so many runouts, so many transition opportunities. And these guys are just freak athletes and a load to deal with, flying downhill. And so, look, I don't think they're going to do what they did to Gonzaga every night or what they did to Auburn every night, but it was certainly very compelling, and they certainly have a chance to be one of, if not the best team in college basketball.
Let's talk for a second about the team that Tennessee beat, which being even unbiased, I think was like kind of a almost semi-classic game. I mean, it felt really like March, it felt like an Elite Eight Final Four matchup. Houston, to me, feels like there's a little bit of work to do, but I mean, I guess at the same time, got a lot of freshmen, a lot of good freshmen, but it feels like they're, a lot of people were crowning them as the preseason pick for the national championship. I don't think they're there yet, but still very, very good. But what are your thoughts on Houston?
Yeah, and first, I think it was a great win for Tennessee, a team that is also still kind of finding its footing, finding its stride. Right. But I do think, I think being this reliant on three freshmen really, and really a fourth in Chase McCarty, who's kind of their seventh or eighth man, it was always going to be bumpy with this Houston group. And I think you felt that offensively at times. I think they've realized pretty quickly that their best offense is just putting the ball in Kingston Fleming's hands, who's one of those freshmen, and just letting him go make plays. Because when they try to run their more kind of structured stuff, I think they really lack the post presence that they had a year ago. That has hurt them. And I think, just from a identity standpoint, I don't think everybody knows exactly where everybody's supposed to be on the floor at any given time, right? And that's a natural thing with a young group. And I think they've sort of figured out, hey, look, man, like if Fleming's just goes and gets one, like we can be really good. And that's what happened late in that game. The way that Houston battled back was, if they spaced it out, they trusted Flemings to get to the rim and go make plays. And so, yeah, I'm still probably bullish on the ceiling with Houston, but the floor is maybe a little bit lower than it's been the last couple of years when they've had so much experience and so much continuity year over year roster wise.
I want to hit on a couple SEC teams here that national championship type aspirations before the season. One thing, Bob, that we didn't hit on in the intro is I think I'm officially a little bit worried about Florida. It was, just spotty early in the season, waiting for the guards to get going. I think it's to the point where I'm a little bit concerned. So I guess my question for you, Kevin, is you throw Florida, Kentucky, I guess to a lesser extent Arkansas. Which of that group do you have the most confidence in to get it right and be able to make a deep run in March or become an SEC title contender by February?
I probably have the most confidence in Florida. I wouldn't say I'm bullish on any. Like, I just think with Florida, at the end of the day, Xavier Lee and Boogie Flan are not going to continue to shoot under 25% from three. Like, they may not be as good as shooters as Florida hoped. They may not be as good as shooters as people expected, but those guys have just been so cold. And Xavier in particular kind of finally came out of it a little bit in the second half against Providence. And that's obviously massive because at the core, they're doing a lot of good things. They're dominating the glass like they usually do. They're protecting the paint at a very high level like they did last year with Chinyelu. Hauk has made the jump. It's just like the guards haven't done enough to the battle. And I think if the guards turn it a little bit, and I think they will eventually, just law of averages wise, like Boogie and Xavier don't even have to play well necessarily. They just have to make shots, and that will make them look a lot better. I just feel a little more comfortable with them at the moment than maybe Kentucky, who, I really need to see them get healthy with Quaintance and Lowe to really feel confident that this team gets to national contention.
Keeping it on some of those SEC teams because you were at this game, and I again was. I had abandoned my family and I was watching Arkansas Duke on Thanksgiving night. Fortunately, everybody else was asleep, but I wanted to watch that game. Duke pulled away at the end, but I have a couple questions. My first one, though, is Arkansas. I was, as I watched that game, I was like, I don't know, this felt like vintage Calipari, right? He can get those guys going for a minute, and they have so many athletes. I'm really impressed with Darius Acuff. I started, maybe I was getting a little intoxicated in the moment, but I was kind of like, man, they might be as big a threat in the SEC as anybody this year because the SEC is going to be very good. But I think the point we're all kind of making here is I don't know if there's anybody who is just going to flat out dominate the conference. What are your thoughts on Arkansas?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good and not a lot of great in the SEC, and that helps a team like Arkansas. They're a team that, their results sort of look better when you realize what everybody else has done against those teams, right? Like, they lost at Michigan State. That was maybe a bit of a surprise the first week of the year. Now, Michigan State looks awesome. They look like a top 10 team. That looks
They
like a
do.
really tricky game. Michigan State handled North Carolina on Thanksgiving on a neutral. Like those are great signs. And I thought, as you said, I thought they played really well against Duke. Now, again, I think Duke has things to figure out, but Acuff was elite. The athleticism on the wings, they can just kind of send bodies at you with is powerful. I do think their front court has not lived up to the hype and expectations, particularly the portal guys with Malik Ewan and Pringle, and it just hasn't quite come together yet. But they do have the type of talent that Cal needs in terms of on-ball creation. And excuse me, I feel pretty good that they're going to be a factor in this SEC race. They got to get Carter Knox and DJ Wagner going, right? Like those are two older guys that have been in the program that I think are struggling not being the guy, right? Like this is supposed to be their team theoretically, and Acuff and Malik Thomas have passed them. But, if they can get a little more from those two guys, I think they have a chance to be as good as anybody in this conference.
So my second question, and tied into that game, we've all watched Duke. We saw them firsthand when Tennessee played them in an exhibition. Goes without saying, Cameron Boozer is just a beast, and I'm really just more and more impressed every time I watch him because of all the things he does besides score the ball. The question I have is, we know Duke has other guys, but we haven't seen, I don't think, you might be able to correct me on that, but we haven't seen a circumstance where Cameron Boozer's like in foul trouble or something else. And I wonder, does Duke have enough, in a really high level game? I feel like there's just not as many pieces to that Duke team as I've seen in the past.
It's funny. I think they have a lot of talent. I don't know that they have guys whose identity is to take over games. Like Isaiah Evans to me is the clear kind of second scorer.
Right.
But he's the type of guy that's going to score 13 points in 4 minutes and then, 0 points for the next 20, right? Like he's a streak shooter and a streak scorer. And that's a hard place to be. And I think they felt that in that Arkansas game when things weren't going well, when Boozer was slowed down a little bit early, their offense really stagnated and was just kind of looking around, waiting for Cam to go bail them out. And, I think they need Evans to be more consistent. They need Caleb Foster to play better. He had a great second half, but overall this season has kind of continued his disappointing career. Dame Sarr's really good as a talent. He's probably a top 15 pick. He's not someone that's going to carry you offensively. Same thing with Nick Kamenia, probably not quite as high level a draft prospect, but another guy that like is a good player and as a freshman can plug in there, but not someone you're calling his number a lot. So I do think, as teams continue to throw different coverages at Cam, which they will do, doubles, forcing the ball out of his hands, whatever you have to do, it will be a fascinating test to see what does Duke do to respond. And I think for the most part, Cam is a good enough passer and a good enough decision maker to make teams pay when they do that. But it's also going to put a lot of pressure on some of these other young guys at Duke to really take the next step and play with confidence that I don't think they're playing with right now.
To Bob's point, I'm curious to get your thoughts on it because this is something I've said a couple times. To me, with Duke, it feels like the floor is about as high as anyone, but I guess it's because Isaiah Evans is the second guy and he does so much without the ball in his hands. I just don't see the ceiling as being as high as, not that I can't win a national title, but not as high as some of these other top level teams at this point.
Well, and I think the other thing with their ceiling last year, what made them so elite was they just dominated the rim. I mean, Kaman Malawach was a complete game changer on that end, especially defensively. And so you just, I always think about those UConn teams with Klingon, and what made them so special was it felt like you had to make such tougher shots than they did to win the game. And Duke had that last year and just got beat in a 12-minute, collapse against Houston. And I don't know that Duke quite has that this year. I think they're going to have to, even if they're very sound defensively, which it looks like they are, they're going to have to do things maybe a little bit differently and not be able to rely on just pure length and athleticism. So, I think the ceiling question with Duke is very valid. It is funny to look up and think about last year at this time with Duke, and they had lost to Kentucky and they had lost to Kansas, and here you are this time. They've beaten Kansas, they've beaten Arkansas, they've beaten Texas. It's like, just don't know how good Duke really is, right? And that part of that's just the standard that we're going to put on these guys with all the talent that they have. But I think that the optimist case for Duke is that there's a lot of runway when you're playing these young guys to continue to take steps forward and improve. And I don't think we've seen Duke's best basketball yet.
Well, one last thing on the SEC, and just kind of generally, I was surprised looking at it yesterday that KenPom still has them from a net rating standpoint as the top conference by a decent margin. I was surprised. To me, I feel like the Big Ten and the Big 12 have both been better to this point. I'm curious where you feel like the SEC stacks up, just as a whole at this point.
Yeah, I do think the SEC has probably been buoyed a little bit by, here comes Vanderbilt, and LSU is all of a sudden a top 25 KenPom team, which I don't really buy, right? Like they've just stacked up quality kind of from the middle and the middle bottom, and those teams have all had great starts, and so I think that's helped a lot. I don't know how much that stands. I do think in terms of the top end teams, it does feel like it's the Big Ten, and that's Michigan and Purdue. But also, I think Michigan State and Illinois, who are rapidly emerging into that conversation. And again, the question will be, it's really hard to play in a league where there's no bottom, and the SEC had no bottom round. I had a small bottom last year. I'm not sure it has a bottom this year, right? Like I do think in the Big Ten, you're going to be able to beat up on Penn State and Minnesota and Rutgers, and the Big 12 probably has something to say about it as well. But I think if you're handicapping where a national champion comes from, I think the Big 10 and Big 12 are probably safer bets at the moment.
Yeah, so what's funny is we've spent all my headspace has been about Michigan because of what we saw last week, but we've kind of buried the lead about how good Arizona's looked, Big 12 team, and then I'm an Indiana native, so Purdue is always one that you were a Purdue fan when you grow up there, and I was a Purdue guy. So I'm really so happy to see how they're playing. But I have to say, I'm thinking about Purdue. It's like, God, the Big Ten, just what you mentioned, Illinois, Michigan State, Purdue, and then some of these other teams that showed out, like in Maui, USC, and others. UCLA is supposed to be pretty good. They're not, scuffling a little. I just think that conference is going to be loaded, and I would like to ask you your quick thoughts on Purdue as we wrap up, just because everything is mostly it's always been rooted in Tennessee fans. It's a sore spot when you talk about Purdue because of Zach Edey and all that stuff, but I mean, if you can't appreciate Braden Smith as a point guard, then you got something wrong with you.
Yeah, right. They're different from the Edey era because they're a lot more guard oriented. They're a lot more 3-point oriented. They will still play through their bigs with Kaufman, Wren, and Clough. But they've looked really sharp. I felt like I was still waiting for them to hit that next gear, and then they finally did it against Texas Tech last week and beat them by 30. That was very impressive. I'll see them on Saturday in West Lafayette against the Iowa State team that's been phenomenal. That'll be another great test. I do think with the preseason expectations on Purdue, they're just gonna feel this like immense pressure, and every time they don't play well, right? Like they get knocked out of the number 1 spot in the AP poll because they struggled with Oakland for a half. Other teams aren't going to be held to that quite same standard this year. I think Purdue, because of all the returning talent, will, and how they respond to that will be fascinating. But despite their limitations athletically, I just think they're so skilled and have such elite point guard play and such elite shooting and such elite coaching that they're going to be a very difficult out, even if maybe physicality and athleticism wise, a team like Michigan could potentially beat up on them.
Yeah. One Tennessee thing out the door. Rarely I feel like the polls and the metrics match up as much as they are with Tennessee right now. Right outside the top 10 in that 11 to 15 range, and I think just about all of them. Torvik may have them 10. But what do you see? What right now if Tennessee doesn't get into that top 10, that 5 to 10 range? What keeps them from doing that? What's your biggest question with Tennessee right now?
I just think they're putting so much on Gillespie and Nate Ament's plate at the moment. And I thought it was really encouraging in Vegas to see Jalen Carey kind of put it together and see Bishop Boswell have a really big game against Houston. And then I think follow that up with a solid performance against Kansas. Like if Tennessee wants to be in that SEC championship contention, Final Four contention that they've been in the last couple of years, I think it relies on finding quality options beyond really Okpara, Gillespie, and Nate. And I think they're hopefully on their way to that. And the great thing about these tournaments is it gives you an opportunity to really cycle bodies and see who's ready to go. And I think they learned some lessons last week, which will be really valuable. But I think still a work in progress in terms of kind of the role allocation beyond that big three.
All right, Kevin. Well, really appreciate you joining us. Awesome stuff as always. Well, where can folks find your work, and what all do you have on the docket for this week?
Yeah, we're plowing along over at si.com. Now that I've get off the road for a little bit, I can sink my teeth into some other stuff. So we'll have kind of pretender talk on the national title front this week. We'll also have ACC, SEC challenge takeaways, and hopefully some post-mortem stuff on the Players Era, which was obviously a very unique event and will be a big part of scheduling going forward. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, and by the way, I know you've got some affiliation with Basket Under Review, right?
Yes.
You guys are doing great stuff over there. Will Warren's a friend of us, so you guys are all running in good company. It's so cool to see such a kind of a super team getting put together like that.
Yeah, it's just great to have more people talking and writing and covering college basketball 365 days a year. It's a really smart group of people, and that Discord channel gets active if anyone wants to hop in there.
I bet. Hey, Kevin, man, thank you so much, man. Really appreciate the time. Looking forward. Maybe we'll catch you again later on in the season and see if we actually knew what we were talking about on this one. But I really appreciate it and hope you have a great season and good holiday season too.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Ryan.
See you, Kevin.
See you, man. That guy's got a pretty fun job, I would say.
Yeah, I'd say so. I was I was impressed. Him seeing his tweets and I mean he's a Chicago guy, so not a terrible commute to get over there. But being at the United Center after 3 days in Vegas was a tough game to turn down, but I was impressed by it.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, let's bring it home and focus a little bit of discussion on the Vols. They're back from Vegas, obviously, that quality resume win against Houston. Then it ended a little bit disappointingly with a kind of a rough second half against Kansas. But all things told, they still fared pretty well in the rankings, climbed up to number 13 in the latest AP poll. They're number 12 in the initial net rankings. And where I didn't check Ken Palm, actually, Ryan. Where do they rank in terms of offensive and defensive efficiency?
18th in offense, 13th in defense.
Okay, so kind of all these numbers I see don't necessarily shock me too much. Feels kind of like where they probably feels like properly situated, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think the thing that I would hammer home with Tennessee is I think they've been better offensively and worse defensively than expected. I mean, you look at Torvik and you use his rankings that take out any preseason expectation from it. Simply what's happened on the court. Tennessee's 9th in offense and 33rd in defense. You look at his rankings, which are, based off of how you perform against top 50 opponents, which for Tennessee, it's just 2 games. It's an incredibly small sample size. It's what we saw last week in back-to-back games against Houston and Kansas. Right. But in those 2 games, compared to teams playing top 50, they're 4th in offense and get this 130th in defense. So this group has been much better offensively than I expected. I think to Kevin's point, it's been a lot of what they've done in the front court and how efficient those guys were. Certainly when you look at last week, Jalen Carey was so awesome in the Houston and Kansas game, but plenty to get cleaned up on defense. And I think especially on the perimeter, being able to defend athletic guards off the dribble. I think besides Bishop Boswell, you've seen Tennessee struggle to do that in their small dose of quality games so far.
Yeah, it's been interesting in that Houston and Kansas game. I was struck by, we obviously know the size of our guards and, Jacoby and Bishop. But man, both those teams threw some big guards at those guys, and it also took me back for a moment and made me realize whatever Zakai Ziegler accomplished blows my mind because because he's smaller than Jacoby, right? And but that's what we're up against now. It's just that's the way of the game these days is you're seeing more and more guards that are 6'4", 6'5" as the floor rather than 6'1".
No doubt. And I think if there's a message of positivity in the defense, I think well, there could be plenty, but what I would point to from a personnel standpoint is Jacoby Gillespie plays. Let's see if I can find it here. 9 minutes, 38 minutes, 36 minutes in 3 days, and Tennessee's asking him to do a ton. I mean, his usage rate
Yeah.
offensively is really, really high. So I don't think in those confines it's shocking to see him struggle some on the defensive end in those latter 2 games, and not that he was just terrible by any means. So I think he is a solid defender. He's not Zakai Ziegler. He's not Bishop Boswell. I think he's probably better than what he's shown. And in the Houston game too, I think Nate, not that he's an elite defender, but his length and makes him a very high floor defender on the perimeter, because I think he's a good enough athlete to not just have tons of issues with athleticism. That Houston game, he's on the bench a ton with foul trouble. So, those are maybe some messages of positivity. But as we get into this week, that's kind of a big area that I'm going to be watching, because I'm sure that's been at the top of Rick Barnes' list over the last week of things he wants to see cleaned up.
Yeah. You made me think of something, and we didn't mention it earlier, but when I was watching specifically against Gonzaga, when Alabama played Gonzaga, Alabama is going to do what they do, man. And when the threes are falling, they're just hard to deal with. They score at a high level. However, it feels like they're putting a lot on LeBaron Philon right now, and it felt like Gonzaga figured out a way to shut the water off on him in the second half. And all of a sudden, as I watched that game, and again, I know it's game to game, but it was like, man, Alabama doesn't look like that much of a threat if you tighten up on Philon. Now, they have other guys that could pick it up, but I couldn't help but think of our situation with Jacoby too, like so much reliance on one guard.
I would push back a little bit on that, because Latrell Wrightsell didn't play in that game. He was hurt.
That's fair. Yeah, good point.
But to your point, I mean, he's out, and Aiden Holloway didn't play well, which I think Aiden Holloway will play better. Yeah. But then it did fall on Philon, and you look at what they have in the front court, which is the big question. There's just not a ton there. Bull Bowen can hit some open shots, but there's not a guy you're gonna trust to go get you double-digit scoring every night out from that group, in my opinion. And I think Tennessee-Alabama is a fascinating matchup, just from a clash of styles, because what I just said about worrying about the defense, I mean, Alabama would be able to exploit that as well as anybody. But on the other end, I think like a lot of Oats teams or Oats teams that aren't elite I think they're just kind of soft inside. And and certainly Gonzaga's got a really good front court too. But there was one point in the second half of that game, as that was one of the games that I sat there and watched the entire thing just in the stands. I went and looked it up. I mean, this was like 12, 13 minutes left in the game, and Gonzaga was rebounding like 68% of its misses. I mean, Alabama couldn't rebound. They couldn't get stops unless they were forcing turnovers. And it's been off and on, but obviously we saw that be an issue in the Purdue game, and it feels Tennessee is, probably as much as anybody in the SEC would be able to exploit that. And it always is. Barnes against Oats always is a fascinating, clash of styles, but it feels all the more dramatic this season.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about the week ahead for the Vols, right? They have the first of 3 Power 5 opponents starting on Tuesday night. Tennessee rolls into Syracuse to take on the Orange. And I will say this, based on what I saw in Vegas, it's like a no-brainer to say this season's edition of the Qs is much better than last season. If you recall, Tennessee just beat them like a drum last season in Knoxville. And those guys had arguably, they went 0-3 in Vegas, but I don't think there's anybody that played as tough a group of 3 as Syracuse did. Took Houston to overtime, right, before losing by 4.
Yeah, took Houston to overtime, played Kansas close for a lot of that game, ended up losing by about 10, and then it just felt like the wheels fell off against Iowa State in that third game, which, again, we talk about like the scheduling from players there. Like why was it not Iowa State, Alabama in that third game and Maryland versus Syracuse? Like, to me, that seemingly made way more sense
right
for what those teams had done to that point. So yeah, I think that's something that stands out. They will be down, Donnie Freeman, who did miss all 3 of those games in Vegas. He was their leading scorer, I think around 17 points per game going into players era. But it's a better, to your point, it's a better Syracuse team. I don't know how much better. I don't know if this is an NCAA tournament team, but I think last year that game in Knoxville ended up being like a quad 3.
Yeah.
game. I mean, maybe I think it was Miami ended up being a quad 4. I mean, Tennessee's strength of schedule got killed by Miami, Syracuse, and Virginia at a conference, but this will at the very least be a quad 2 game, and I think we'll have a chance if Syracuse can play well in an improved ACC, a chance to be a quad 1 game when it's all done and finished.
Yeah. Yeah, Tennessee's got that edge right out of the gate with Freeman missing another game. Like you said, they're up front. What I was struck by watching them in Vegas, Syracuse is long. I wouldn't say they're super big per se, but they're long, right? William Kyle, Tyler Betsy, Sadiq White, those are all guys that are right around 6'9", so they're not small, man.
And good positional size too. Back to just your point earlier about guard size. Kion Anthony, 6'5", Nathan George 6'3". So it's to your point, not a team with a ton of front court size, but very long, and they've been pretty good defensively. So one thing that just from a matchup standpoint that heck, by the time a lot of people listen to this game will be over. But thing I point to matchup wise, Syracuse not been a very good rebounding team this season. Tennessee should be able to exploit that. On the other end, Syracuse very good at taking care of the basketball, has not turned the ball over much, and has forced a lot of turnovers. I would say that was to me one of the biggest positives from players' era for Tennessee. Their first 2 single-digit turnover games of the year against Houston and Kansas, their best competition. I think Jacoby Gillespie combined for 1 turnover in those 2 games, and really it was that kind of late game turnover against Kansas when Tennessee was in a little bit of desperation mode. So a very positive development for Tennessee, which is probably why their offensive rating is so high in those 2 games. They're good rebounding the basketball and good at taking care of it. So from just the math game of it, maybe not quite Nate Oates level math, but just the getting more shots game, that's what I'm looking for tonight. Rebounding and turnovers. Tennessee should have a huge edge on rebounding. Syracuse will test them with their ability to take care of the basketball.
Yeah, exactly. They don't shoot. By my measure, it looks like Syracuse doesn't shoot the ball very well. So this feels like one Tennessee should get, but they should also they got to be on point. That's all.
No, for sure. And to that point, it's kind of classic college basketball. Syracuse plays 3 hard press games, 2 of them, they gave themselves a chance to win. Now they're coming home to play another one. Like, this is a spot a lot of times you see a team go get that big win. So Tennessee's got to be on their game, and I think losing that game to Kansas, especially has to make you feel better. You'd expect Tennessee's mindset and commitment, focus to the details should be good entering this game.
Yeah. You going to be in Nashville on Saturday?
I will be in Nashville on Saturday. Yeah, excited for that one.
Yeah, big one. Number 14 Illinois and the Vols. The Illini are 6-2, but their losses come at the hands of Alabama and UConn. They are one of the highest scoring teams in the nation. Their entire, I think it's their entire starting 5, whatever the case, 5 players averaging double figures. Good guard play, Kylan Boswell and Andrei Stojakovic. Those are the leading scorers. And then they've got the Avicic brothers, David Merkovic, Keaton Wagler, who I think we've talked about before on this show, kind of a freshman who came out of nowhere and is really solid. I mean, this team's deep, man. They go 9 deep with little effort.
They do, yeah. And to me, as fun as a team to watch in the country. So it should be a big-time challenge. I would argue the hardest game Tennessee has left. I think I would say that in the non-conference slate with the neutral site aspect of it, with Tennessee getting Louisville at home. So it's, again, a team that's going to test Tennessee defensively. Not to harp on that too much, but the last thing I will add on Illinois, so I was talking to Roger Hoover, who's a Tennessee alum in Vegas, and he was out there calling the games, and he's been doing the Alabama play-by-play while football season still goes on. Mike Keefe, man, that's a tough task on Saturday. That's a lot of Eastern European names. Merkovic, Big Z, Stojakovic. I mean, and Roger was talking about, he said, it's not actually, he said, I didn't know until about 30 minutes before the game. It's not David Merkovic, it's David Merkovic. So that's a tough one. That is a tough name game when you talk about 5 or 6 Eastern European guys on the team.
Yeah, they got a Petrovic too, right? Or Petrovic. Yes. I don't know if it's Petrovic, but Underwood's definitely He's been a good sport about that whole Eastern
He has
European
been.
vibe too, with some of his social media. I think that's awesome. So quickly, as we really wind things down, Ryan, like if you had to pick one storyline with Tennessee this coming week that you're most interested in, what would that be for you?
Yeah, it's tough. I think it would probably be the perimeter defense, just because of how far off it was from the standard. But another one I'll throw up there, and to me it's the offense from the front court. Can Jalen Carey repeat what he did against Houston and Kansas?
Yeah.
I mean, even Felix Okpara, I thought played well offensively. Was better around the rim than he often is. JP Estrella, can he continue to give Tennessee efficiency offensively? And does Tennessee try to get those guys more touches inside? I think when you looked back, especially at the Kansas game, the way some of Tennessee's players in the second half struggled shooting from the perimeter, it's hard not to think that there should have been a bigger emphasis throwing the ball inside with some of the efficiency. So that's one of the big things I would point to, and Carey especially, because Carey was so good in those final two games, and it didn't matter. Tennessee destroyed Rutgers, but I thought he was about Tennessee's worst player that played more than 10 minutes in the Rutgers game too. So he feels like he's a roller coaster a bit right now. I want to see if he can build off of two games and just have a level of consistency. And if he doesn't play great again, can that floor just be like a pretty good performance and not a bad performance?
See, that's top of the list for me. It's about the rotation. Also, I guess rotation's a guard too, between Amari Abram and Ethan Berg, and what's going to happen there, because it sure feels like Bishop is locked down the number 2 spot, the 2-guard spot in the starting lineup. But Jalen Carey, for me, I have such ambition for this guy. I loved watching him when he was with Vanderbilt, and I was so excited to see him come to Knoxville. And it's been a little choppy, like you said, up until last week in Vegas. And I was struck by also that guy has a handle from the standpoint. I mean, great passes. He had that no-look pass under the basket to Estrella. And I mean, he can be, again, never going to be a guy that's going to get you 30 points. That's not his game, but he can do so many things that it feels like he completes a lot of stuff for this team when his game is on. And it's just a question of, can he string together a consistent, pattern of those types of games?
No doubt. And the passing has been, eye-opening. It feels like he's playing at a good pace. And it almost feels like it's the idea of looking to pass first, it's leading to him just playing a little bit slower. And a lot of times it's, he's looking and then the right moves to go up and make a move and shoot. But it felt like early in the season, a couple of those bye games, he was just played a little rushed. He was trying to score the ball right when he got it, and he's looking to get others involved right now. And obviously the rebounding I've harped on a lot. It's the big area where he can be really, really good. And he showed that, and certainly a really good sign. And a guy I think that, benefits from, he's so strong that when he plays hard, it's, when he can play 100%, it becomes difficult to slow him down. I think he, as much as anybody in that Tennessee front court, benefits from the depth that he can play in shorter stints and less minutes a game and go 100% while he's out there. And he just becomes kind of a load to deal with.
Yeah. Well, the last thing I'll say, SEC ACC Challenge, we're in the midst of it with the Vols at Syracuse on Tuesday night. Boy, there's some serious matchups. On Tuesday, number 15, Florida at number 4, Duke, number 16, North Carolina at number 18, Kentucky. And then Wednesday night, Louisville, number 6 at 25, number 25, Arkansas, and then Alabama, Clemson, North Carolina State going to Auburn, like you said earlier, SMU against Vanderbilt. There is some serious ball to watch this week, Ryan.
There is. It should be really fun. I think later in the week too, if I'm not mistaken. I believe it's on Fridays, Gonzaga at Kentucky. So some big time matchups from the ACC SEC Challenge. I would say there's more games on Tuesday night. I think the two I'm most interested in is that Auburn, NC State, and Arkansas, Louisville games on Wednesday. So those are the two that I think I'm gonna be most locked into or most curious to see.
No doubt. And I'll be looking forward to it. But for this week, that wraps it up. We want to say thank you for watching and listening. We'll be back with another edition of the Rim Runner next week, talking about probably a recap of this pivotal week for the Vols. who then take a break for exams. That I didn't realize, Ryan, there's like a 10-day gap between Illinois
Yeah.
and Louisville, but that's fine. We'll definitely have stuff to talk about because there's big matchups going on all around the SEC, like we just said, as well as the country. As a reminder, make sure that you hit the like and subscribe button for the show on YouTube on the Rocky Top Insider channel. Download our podcast wherever you listen to your pods. Special thanks to Kevin Sweeney of SI.com for joining us. And many thanks to all of you out there for making time to check this show out. Ryan, thanks to you, man. Looking forward to talking to you next time about what's hopefully a productive week for the Vols.
Yeah, it should be a very interesting first road trip or first road game of the season, and then obviously another very challenging task with Illinois. So it should be interesting to see how Tennessee responds from a disappointing end to a good week in Vegas, and see if they can build on this thing going into, like you said, a little bit of an open date in here in the middle of December.
Yeah, let's go get it. All right. Again, everybody, have a great week ahead, and we will see you next time on the RTI Rim Runner.